Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name is Dominic Callahan, 28 years old. I am the owner of a small coffee shop called Memory Lane in Kearney, Nebraska, a tiny town nestled among endless corn fields where the vast blue sky seems to swallow all sorrows. Kearney isn't anything special, just a few quiet streets, an old-fashioned grocery store, and folks so familiar with each other that I can guess their orders the moment they step into my shop. But for me, this is the place where I found myself after years of being lost within the very family I once called home. Today is a crisp autumn day, the air carrying the scent of dry leaves and a hint of Nebraska's earthy essence. I'm sitting in a cozy corner of my shop at a worn wooden table by the window, looking out at a road where a few corn-laden trucks rumble by. In my hand is a steaming cup of black coffee, and in front of me is an old, dusty box of photos. I dragged it out from the storage room after cleaning this morning, inexplicably drawn to revisit memories I had once tried to bury. I lift the lid of the box, and the smell of old paper and time hits me. The photos are a jumble, some yellowed, some stuck together from humidity. I flip through them one by one as if turning the pages of my own life. One photo shows me at 5 years old standing next to my sister Audrey, both of us wearing identical red sweaters, grinning ear to ear in front of a Christmas tree. I smile at that one, just barely. Another captures my parents, Graham and Catherine Callahan, dressed impeccably in a suit and dress, their eyes stern as if playing the part of a perfect family in a commercial. I hold that one a moment longer, then set it aside. And then I pause. My fingers tremble as they touch a small frayed photo. It's of my grandmother, Esther Callahan, and me, taken in front of my Uncle Walter's house on the outskirts of Kearney. She's wearing a dark green sweater, her silver hair neatly pinned up, her cloudy eyes still sparkling with a touch of warmth. I, probably 16 or 17 at the time, stand beside her, holding her hand. My smile is strained, like it's hiding something. That photo cuts through me like a sharp, unexpected knife slicing across my thoughts. Memories flood back unbidden, like a torrent breaching the walls I've built around my heart. I see my grandmother's bewildered eyes again, her trembling hand clutching mine at the airport years ago. I hear her calling my name, her frail voice filled with love amidst the clamor of the crowd. "Dominic," she had said softly, almost drowned out by the overhead announcements. "You sure about this, honey?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She looked up at me, blinking fast behind her thick glasses. "You know I'm proud of you. Just don't forget who you are." "I won't, Grandma," I said, trying to sound steady. She gave my hand a squeeze. "You come back when you're ready. I'll be here." I nodded, swallowing down the lump in my throat, though I had no idea when, or if, I'd be back. And I see myself then, just 18 years old, standing at a crossroads of choices, unsure of what I was doing, only knowing I couldn't leave her alone. I take a sip of coffee, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Setting the photo down, I pull an old notebook from my jacket pocket and open it to a blank page. I'm no writer, nor am I good at storytelling. But today I want to write this story down. Not to blame, not to resent, but to remember what saved me. What transformed me from a scared kid caught between duty and rebellion into the man I am today. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, about a 3-hour drive from Kearney. Lincoln is bigger, more modern, but still carries the dullness of a small city where people live by unspoken rules. Our house was in the suburbs, a 2-story white-painted home with a wooden fence and a meticulously trimmed lawn. My father, Graham Callahan, was a financial officer, always in a crisp suit, speaking slowly but sharply, as if every word was calculated. He loved recounting his struggles, how he rose from nothing to afford this house, a new car, and a proper family. My mother, Catherine, was a nurse, always busy with shifts, but when home she rarely smiled. She was a perfectionist. From the way she folded napkins on the dining table to how Audrey and I were expected to behave to avoid embarrassing the family. Audrey, my sister, 3 years younger than me, was a gentle, shy girl, always trying to please everyone, but easily hurt. Audrey and I were close, but there was an invisible distance between us, as if we were both afraid to voice what we truly thought. From the outside, our family was a picture of perfection. Audrey and I excelled in school, always at the top of our classes, praised by teachers. Our parents attended every parent-teacher meeting, flashing polite smiles and boasting about our achievements. But inside, our home was cold, like a museum where everything was arranged for display, not for living. My father often spoke of filial piety, how children should be grateful and live up to their parents' sacrifices. Yet, when his own mother called for help, he'd find ways to brush her off. "I'm busy, mother," he'd say, waving a hand as if the conversation bored him. "You've got Walter nearby, don't you?" Then he'd hang up the phone with a sigh, muttering something under his breath. I noticed, but I didn't dare ask. I was only 14 or 15. And what did I know beyond obeying my parents? My grandmother Esther Callahan and my grandfather lived on a small farm a few dozen miles from Lincoln, where fields of wheat and corn stretched to the horizon. They were simple, hard-working farmers, living modestly but with abundant love. I remember the summers the first spent at their farm, where my grandfather taught me how to plant seeds. "Push it down just a bit," he'd say, guiding my hand. "There. Now pat the soil, like you're tucking it in for a nap." And my grandmother baked butter cookies and shared stories from her days as an elementary school teacher. She had a gentle voice, as if every word carried a bit of sunshine. She loved me the most, she always said, and I believed her. Every time she hugged me, I felt sheltered, as if nothing in the world could harm me. Her arms were thin but strong, and when she pulled me close, the world grew quiet. Like I was safe, like nothing could go wrong. But then my grandfather passed away suddenly from a heart attack when I was 14. I still remember that day. The sky was gray, a light drizzle falling on the window panes. The phone call came just after lunch, and everything slowed down after that. We drove out to the farm, and when we walked into the living room, my grandmother was sitting silently in her favorite chair, clutching his framed photo in her lap. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. She just sat there, rocking slowly. From then on, she began to change. She forgot to cook, forgot my name sometimes, calling me Billy, the name of an old high school friend of hers. "Billy," she'd whisper, "have you seen Edward? He was going to fix the fence this morning." At first, I'd correct her gently. "It's me, Grandma. Dominic." She'd blink at me, puzzled, then smile slowly. "Of course, Dominic. Of course. You just look so much like him sometimes." Other times, she'd stand at the door for hours, staring down the long gravel road that led away from the farm. "He'll be back soon," she'd murmur. "He went into town. Always forgets his hat." It broke my heart, but I didn't know what to do except hold her hand and say silly things to make her smile. "Maybe he's baking cookies with the neighbors," I said once, and she laughed, even though her eyes didn't quite light up the same. My father said she had Alzheimer's. He spoke calmly, clinically, as if it were just a fact of life. "She's old. It's inevitable," he said, folding his arms and turning away from the dinner table as if the conversation bored him. But I saw it, that flicker of annoyance in his eyes, like her illness was an inconvenience. I began to realize that filial piety, in his eyes, was just empty words. Something he liked to say, not something he lived. My mother said nothing. She only sighed whenever my grandmother called and asked the same question 3 times. "Do you want to talk to her?" she'd ask, already holding the phone out. And I, a 15-year-old kid, just kept my head down, trying to be the good son they expected. But inside, I felt a crack forming. Small at first, then growing. Every time I saw my grandmother's face on a phone screen. Hopeful, confused, alone. When I was 16, during Thanksgiving, my family drove to my grandmother's farm, a little over an hour from Lincoln. The road was dusty, flanked by parched corn fields, with a few cows grazing lazily under the pale sunlight. I sat in the back seat next to Audrey, staring out the window, trying not to think about how my parents had been arguing all week about what to do with Grandma. "She can't live alone anymore," my father said one night, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "She doesn't want to leave the farm," my mother answered quietly, folding laundry like it was a shield. When we arrived, Grandma was standing on the porch, wearing her familiar dark green sweater. Her silver hair was disheveled, her cloudy eyes scanning the driveway, as if unsure who she was waiting for. I opened the door before the car had even fully stopped and ran up to her. "Dominic," she said, her voice trembling. "You've grown so tall." I hugged her tightly. The faint scent of butter cookies still clung to her sweater, and for a moment, I was 7 again, running barefoot in her kitchen. "I missed you, Grandma," I whispered. She smiled, still warm like autumn sunshine. I took her hand and led her inside, trying to hide the lump in my throat. That Thanksgiving dinner was livelier than usual. Besides my family, there was Uncle Richard, my dad's younger brother, and his family from Omaha. Uncle Richard was a few years younger than Dad, but he looked older, with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face. He worked for a construction company and loved talking about big projects. "Putting up a whole new wing at the hospital," he said, pointing his fork for emphasis. "Steel frame, glass facade, the works." I overheard Dad scoff later in the kitchen. "Guy's drowning in debt," he muttered under his breath. Richard's wife, Aunt Linda, came too. She was a sharp woman, always in tight dresses, speaking in a high-pitched voice that drowned out everyone else. Their two kids, a few years older than me, ignored Audrey and me completely, heads bent, eyes glued to their handheld gaming devices. They barely looked up even when food was served. The meal started awkwardly. Dad and Uncle Richard sat at opposite ends of the long dining table, exchanging forced small talk about the weather and football. "Looks like snow this weekend," Richard said, stabbing at a piece of turkey. "Maybe," Dad replied, not looking up. "Corn's already in. Doesn't matter now." Mom busied herself arranging plates and adjusting serving spoons as if every misaligned dish might set off a landmine. Occasionally, she glanced at Grandma, who sat quietly next to me, slowly picking at a spoonful of mashed potatoes before setting it down, staring at it like she couldn't quite remember why it was there. I leaned closer, trying to make conversation. "Grandma, did you see the cornfields coming in? Looked real tall this year." She turned to me and smiled vaguely. "Billy, you always did like the corn," she said softly. I didn't correct her. I just nodded and smiled, slipping my hand under the table to hold hers. Her fingers were cold, paper thin, and trembled slightly against mine. Then the argument began. It wasn't loud. No yelling, no slamming of fists, but it was sharp, every word cutting like a knife honed over years of resentment. Uncle Richard, after his third glass of wine, set it down gently and looked across the table. "Mom," he began, voice soft like he was talking to a child, "I think you should sell the farm. It's not safe living alone like this." I watched his eyes flick toward Dad, gauging his reaction. Dad didn't flinch. He set down his knife and fork slowly, then leaned back in his chair with a faint smirk. "Richard, if Mom sells the farm, are you going to take care of her?" Uncle Richard froze, clearly not expecting that response. I mean, Mom, sitting beside Dad, nodded ever so slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't approval, more like resignation. The conversation between Dad and Uncle Richard grew tense. The words were civil, but the tone turned brittle. Neither of them wanted to say it outright, but it was clear, neither truly wanted the responsibility of caring for Grandma. Then Grandma, who had been silent through most of the meal, suddenly lifted her head. Her cloudy eyes scanned the table, and for a moment, they seemed clear. "Stop arguing," she said, her voice slow but steady. "Whoever takes care of me gets everything. The land, the house, the savings, the insurance, all of it." The room went dead quiet. Dad froze, his wine glass suspended midair. Uncle Richard stared at her, stunned. Aunt Linda's eyes widened like she'd just caught sight of a gold mine buried beneath the mashed potatoes. I didn't fully understand the weight of her words then, but I felt it, like the air had changed. A bomb had been placed on the table, and no one dared move. Dad was the first to speak, setting down his glass. "Mom, I'll take care of you," he said firmly, his tone suddenly filled with conviction. "I'm the eldest. You should stay with us." Uncle Richard's eyes narrowed. "She'd be better off in Omaha. Better hospitals, better care." "You're drowning in bills," Dad cut in flatly. "How are you going to pay for her prescriptions?" The argument flipped in an instant. Just minutes earlier, they were both trying to dodge the burden. Now, spurred by Grandma's quiet declaration, they were practically competing to take her in. I felt Grandma's hand trembling in mine. She didn't say another word, just stared ahead at something none of us could see, like she had already drifted somewhere far beyond this room. In the end, Dad won. He was the eldest, and with Mom being a nurse, the logic seemed to fall into place. Uncle Richard gave a reluctant nod, his wife's mouth tight with displeasure. A week after that Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma moved in with us in Lincoln. She brought only a few suitcases of clothes, a framed photo of Grandpa, and the fading fragments of a life that was slowly slipping away. For the first 2 years, things seemed fine. My parents treated Grandma like an honored guest. Mom took her to doctor's appointments, organized all her medications, and even taped a detailed schedule to the fridge. Each day had its own list: morning pills, afternoon vitamins, evening reminders. Everything labeled, everything timed. Dad occasionally took her for walks in the park, bought her a new sweater, and bragged to the neighbors about how filial he was. "She loves the fresh air," he'd say with a proud smile, patting her shoulder in front of Mr. Lewis from next door. "We go out every weekend." Audrey and I were encouraged to spend time with her, talk to her, read to her, or watch her favorite old TV shows. She especially liked the Andy Griffith Show. I saw her smile more during those days, though her smiles often came with a far-off look, as if she were reaching into a fog to retrieve a memory just out of reach. But then things began to change. One evening, I overheard my parents arguing in the living room. I was walking down the stairs for a glass of water when I heard Dad's voice, quiet but sharp. "She has to know where it is," he said. "The property deeds, the bank account, The savings she talked about at Thanksgiving. I've asked, Mom replied, her voice low. She just shakes her head or talks about your father like it's still 1985. Dad huffed. She's not that confused. She's hiding it, I'm sure. Graham, Mom said with a sigh, just calm down. We'll figure it out. A few days later, Mom brought a psychologist to the house. He was middle-aged, soft-spoken, with thick glasses and a honeyed voice. He sat next to Grandma on the living room couch, smiling gently. Esther, he said, do you remember where you kept the deed to the farm? Grandma blinked at him, then looked at me sitting quietly nearby. Billy, she asked. I didn't respond. The man tried again. Do you remember anything about the bank? Or the money you mentioned? She only shook her head and muttered something about Grandpa and a tractor, her words broken and trailing off. Dad stood by the doorway, arms crossed, his jaw clenched. His expression didn't change, but I saw the storm building in his eyes. After that visit, my parents' attitude toward Grandma shifted. Slowly at first, but I felt it. Mom began to complain more, about stains on the tablecloth, spilled coffee on the rug, or when Grandma left the gas stove on. She nearly burned the whole kitchen down. Mom snapped one morning, wiping the counter aggressively. You can't take your eyes off her for 5 minutes. Dad began scolding her in front of guests. Mom, sit still, he said one evening when she wandered into the living room during one of his work calls. Don't bother everyone. Grandma never replied. She'd just lower her gaze, her cloudy eyes fixed on the floor. She looked smaller every day, like the world around her was folding in. Once, I found her in the living room, alone in an armchair, folding and refolding a napkin in her lap. Her hands trembled, her eyes lost, like she was searching for something solid in a place that was slowly unraveling. I started to move toward her, to hug her, but Mom caught my arm. Don't indulge her too much, she said softly. You have to study. Study. Always study. I started feeling suffocated in my own home. Audrey felt it too. I'd knock on her door and find her curled up with headphones on, scribbling furiously in her diary, trying to drown out the arguments with music. I wanted to speak up, to tell them to stop, to say that this wasn't who we were supposed to be. But every time I tried, Dad's stern gaze came to mind, his voice telling me I didn't understand. Mom's tired eyes, the way she looked at me like I was just a kid who needed to focus on college. I was 17, in my final year of high school. The pressure of entrance exams pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. But every time I looked at Grandma, my chest ached, like my heart was being squeezed. One memory still haunts me. It was a stormy night. Thunder rumbled outside, the windows rattling softly. I was doing homework in my room when I heard Mom shout from the living room. She's gone. It's pouring outside. I dropped my pen and ran downstairs. Mom stood at the front door, clutching an umbrella but soaked to the bone, her face pale with panic. Dad was on the phone, pacing. I don't know when she left, he barked. Just send someone, please. Grandma had slipped out the back door without shoes, without an umbrella, clutching Grandpa's framed photo. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my old bike, threw on a raincoat, and pedaled into the storm. Rain stung my face, cold and relentless, but I didn't stop. I rode through every street, knocking on neighbors' doors, but no one had seen her. My heart pounded, not just from fear, but from anger. Anger at my parents for letting it come to this. Anger at myself for not acting sooner. After nearly an hour in the rain, I found her. She was huddled under an old oak tree at the end of a road, soaked to the bone, clutching Grandpa's photo to her chest. Grandma, I called, my voice breaking. She looked up, her cloudy eyes meeting mine, and smiled. Billy, you're back, she whispered. I knelt beside her, hugging her tightly, my tears mixing with the rain. At that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I took off my raincoat and draped it over her shoulders, though it did little to shield her from the cold seeping through her thin clothes. Let's go home, Grandma, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Though a fire burned inside me, the ride back felt endless. I glanced at her often, her silver hair plastered to her forehead, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if searching for something long lost. Are you cold, Grandma? I asked, though I knew she might not answer. She shook her head slightly, whispering, Billy? Where's he gone? I squeezed her hand, unable to respond, knowing Billy wasn't me, and Grandpa could never return. As we reached the yard, the yellow glow from the living room spilled out, illuminating the wet wooden fence. The front door was wide open. Mom was standing there, arms crossed, hair disheveled, her eyes sharp. Dad stood behind her, phone still in hand, as if he'd just finished a call. Audrey was huddled by the door, her eyes red, but when she saw me, she ran out and hugged me. Dominic, you found her, she whispered, her voice choked. I nodded, forcing a smile to reassure her. But Mom's gaze froze me. Esther, Where did you go making the whole house turn upside down? Mom said, stepping toward Grandma. Her tone wasn't worried, but angry, like Grandma was a naughty child who had caused trouble. Grandma stood trembling, rainwater dripping from her clothes onto the wooden floor. But Mom didn't seem to care. Do you know how worried we were? Wandering around in this rain? What were you thinking? Mom's voice rose, drowning out the sound of the rain outside. My blood boiled. Mom, Grandma's freezing. Let me take her to change, I said, trying to stay calm, guiding Grandma past her. But Mom blocked me, grabbing Grandma's arm, not gently. Dominic, stop. I'm talking to her. Grandma looked up, her eyes confused, as if she didn't know where she was. Catherine, I was just looking for George, she mumbled, her voice thin, almost childlike. Mom exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Esther, George is gone. Have you forgotten that too? This is unbearable. I couldn't hold back anymore. Mom, enough. I stepped in front of Grandma. She was soaked from the rain, her blouse clinging to her frail frame. Her fingers trembled around the photo of Grandpa, as she clutched it like it was life itself. She's soaked. She's shaking. Can't you see? My voice cracked with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Helplessness tangled with fury. She didn't mean to get lost. She's sick. Mom's mouth tightened, her arms folded across her chest, but she didn't say anything. She looked away, almost like she couldn't bear the sight of Grandma. Or maybe it was the shame of my words. I'd never spoken to her like that. Never dared to raise my voice in this house. But something inside me cracked the moment I saw Grandma like that. Lost, scared, cold. Then Dad stepped forward. I hadn't even noticed him behind her until now. His eyes were like ice, locked on mine. Dominic, he said slowly, voice low and tight. Do you dare speak to your mother like that? I didn't move. Who do you think you are, raising your voice in this house? He continued. Do you know we've been running around because of her? Your mom had to skip her shift. I had to call the police. Do you know how much trouble this is? He stepped closer, jabbing a finger at me as if I were the one who wandered off, the one who left the door open, the one who made Grandma forget who she was. You're just a kid. You don't understand this burden. Don't stand there preaching. I clenched my fists so hard I felt my nails dig into my palms. I could taste blood in my mouth. I hadn't realized I'd been biting the inside of my cheek. Burden. I repeated, my voice trembling. She's Grandma, not a burden. I couldn't stop. The words came pouring out, one after another. If you think she's such a hassle, why did you agree to take her in? Why not let her stay at the farm, where she was happy? The silence that followed was brutal. Mom froze. Her eyes locked on mine for half a second, wide, startled, then turned away as if she couldn't look at me anymore. But Dad was different. He didn't flinch. He stepped even closer, and I could feel his breath. Hot, furious. What do you know, Dominic? He spat. You're just a kid living off our money, studying because of us. You have no right to talk like that in this house. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say I didn't care about their money, that I never asked for any of this, that I just wanted Grandma treated like a human being, not like some obligation they were dragging behind them. But my throat locked up. Nothing came out. And then Audrey's fingers curled around my arm. Her voice was barely audible, but it trembled. Dominic, stop, she said. Please don't. I looked at her, my little sister, scared and small, and then at Grandma, still standing there, soaked and shivering, staring at something far away that none of us could see. It felt like a nightmare, like I was underwater and couldn't breathe. My parents didn't move as I walked past them, gently taking Grandma's hand. Come on, I whispered. I guided her upstairs, ignoring the heat of their glares on the back of my neck. In her room, I grabbed a towel and started drying her hair. Her thin frame shook as I helped her out of her wet clothes and into a fresh nightgown. Then I wrapped her in a blanket and tucked it around her like a cocoon. She held my hand with a grip stronger than I expected and looked up at me. Billy, she whispered. You're so good to me. I smiled, even though something inside me cracked wide open. I'm Dominic, Grandma, I said softly. But she just smiled again, her eyes miles away. Maybe back at the farm. Maybe with Grandpa. I sat down beside her and listened to the rain easing up outside. The room was quiet, but my thoughts were screaming. I told myself over and over, I have to do something. I can't let her live like this. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. No surprise. From the living room, I heard them, Mom and Dad, still arguing. Their voices sharp, cutting through the walls. This is your fault, Mom snapped. You should have been stricter with him. Oh, don't you start, Dad shot back. Maybe if you actually kept an eye on your mother. I pressed my hands over my ears, but their words still cut through. I curled up tighter under the blanket and thought about Grandma. The way she smiled when she called me Billy. The way her eyes flickered like a dying candle. And I thought about the days ahead, when things could get worse. I didn't know what I'd do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let Grandma keep suffering. The weeks that followed felt heavy, like a storm brewing in our house. Tension clung to the air, thick and constant. My parents no longer hid their frustration with Grandma. Every time she spilled a glass of water or forgot someone's name, Mom would sigh sharply and mutter under her breath. "We can't keep living like this," she said once, louder than usual, while wiping up water from the kitchen floor. Grandma just stood there, confused and blinking, and I wanted to shout at Mom, but I didn't. I never did. Dad was worse. He started tightening his control over everything she did. What she ate, when she could go outside, even where she was allowed to sit during the day. I once caught him locking her bedroom door from the outside. "It's for her safety," he told me when he noticed me staring. "She wandered outside last week, remember?" I didn't believe him. I stood in front of that locked door for a long time that night, fists clenched, wanting to break it down. But I turned away, powerless. Audrey, my sister, retreated deeper into herself. She spoke less and less, disappearing into her room with her headphones on, trying to shut out the world. Some nights, I stood outside her door, listening to the muffled bass of whatever music she had playing, just needing to hear something alive in the house. And I started noticing other things. Whispered conversations late at night. My parents thought Audrey and I were asleep, but I wasn't. I'd press my ear against the wall or crouch near the staircase, catching broken fragments. Long-term solution. Nursing home. No point keeping her here. One night, I crouched just outside the living room. The door was slightly open. I could see Mom on the couch, her voice low and cold. "If she can't remember where the property deeds are," she said to Dad, "there's no use keeping her here. We've done our best, Graham." Dad's voice followed, deeper and flatter than usual. "I'll figure something out. But we need to make sure no one calls us unfit." Unfit. I backed away, heart pounding, stomach twisting. It wasn't just about being tired. They weren't just frustrated. They wanted her gone. They were planning something. And I didn't know what to do. Their chance came sooner than I expected. At dinner, Dad put on his performance smile. "We're going on a family trip," he announced, setting his fork down. "Africa. A safari. Elephants, lions. It'll be amazing." "Africa," I said, blinking. "Why now?" "We all need a break," he replied, waving off the question. "Something to remember. You'll love it, Dominic." Audrey nodded slowly. She didn't say anything, but I saw the sadness in her eyes. She knew too. This wasn't about bonding. I looked down the table at Grandma. She sat quietly at the end, picking up a piece of potato from her plate and setting it back down. Her eyes were somewhere else. "What about Grandma?" I asked, my voice low but shaking. Dad looked at me, smile tightening. "She's coming, of course. We're a family." Mom avoided my gaze completely, staring down at her water glass. I didn't believe either of them. The morning we left, we were up before the sun. I helped Grandma into her dark green sweater, the one she always wore when she felt unsure. She moved slowly, her fingers trembling as they clutched Grandpa's photo. "You ready, Grandma?" I asked. She looked up at me, her lips pulling into the faintest smile. "George used to drive us to the station at dawn," she said. "Always early, always humming." I nodded, guiding her to the car. She held the photo frame like it was her anchor, like it kept her tethered to something no one else could see. The drive to the airport was silent. Dad drove, his eyes fixed on the road. Mom sat next to him, checking plane tickets and muttering about timing and connections. Audrey sat beside me, headphones in, staring out the window like she wanted to disappear. Grandma sat behind us, her hands stroking the edges of Grandpa's photo frame, whispering every so often, "George, where are we going?" I reached back and held her hand. "It's okay, Grandma. I'm here," I said, forcing a smile. But the weight in my chest wouldn't go away. It pressed there, heavy and solid, like a stone I couldn't name. At the airport, the bustle felt suffocating. Announcements blaring, people chattering, suitcases rolling. We lined up at security, my parents leading, Audrey trailing behind with her hood up and her earbuds in. I guided Grandma, walking slowly so she wouldn't tire. She clutched Grandpa's photo in both hands, her steps unsteady, her eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for a familiar face that would never appear. "It's just ahead, Grandma," I murmured, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. She didn't answer, just kept moving, eyes distant. I smiled at her, trying to reassure her even though my gut twisted tighter with each step. Something felt wrong, off in a way I couldn't quite name, like the weight of a dream you forget upon waking. We passed through security. The staff scanned our tickets and checked bags. I noticed Mom glance at Grandma, her lips tightening in a flicker of irritation before she looked away. I gripped Grandma's hand tighter and led her through the long hallway to the departure lounge. The lounge was packed, every seat taken by passengers with oversized suitcases. My parents found a quiet corner and set down their bags. Mom began rechecking the tickets again, obsessively flipping through them like they might change. Audrey plopped into a seat, pulled up her hood, and shoved her headphones back in. Her thumbs danced across her phone screen, already gone from the room. I helped Grandma settle into a chair near the window. "Here we go," I said softly, steadying her. She lowered herself slowly, wincing as she sat, the photo of Grandpa still clutched in her hands. Her fingers gently traced the faded edges of his face. She stared out the window, her gaze distant, like she was trying to see beyond the plains and the clouds and into another time entirely. "I'll get you some water," I said, brushing her shoulder lightly. "Stay here, Grandma. I'll be right back." The airport speaker crackled overhead, interrupting with a calm female voice. "Flight BA 247 to Johannesburg is now boarding. Passengers, please proceed to gate 12. Dad stood immediately, snatching up his suitcase. "Let's go, Dominic." "Audrey," he barked, not even looking at me. Mom grabbed Audrey's hand and pulled her to her feet. She glanced at Grandma, just for a second, but didn't say anything. I turned toward Grandma. She hadn't moved. "Wait, what about Grandma?" I asked, stepping toward her. "She's fine there," Dad snapped. "Dominic, hurry up." I froze. My mouth opened, but no words came. I looked at Grandma again. She was still staring out the window, small and still, her eyes vaguely fixed on the tarmac. "What about Grandma?" I asked again, my voice shaking. "Worry about yourself," Mom snapped. Her hand was already gripping my wrist, tugging me toward the gate. Audrey followed behind her, head down, silent. I looked back. Grandma sat alone, a tiny figure swallowed up by the vast terminal, like a leaf caught in the middle of a storm. My chest tightened, my feet felt heavy and rooted to the floor. No, they couldn't. This couldn't be happening. She wouldn't know where she was. She wouldn't know how to get home. They were leaving her. They were abandoning her. The whispers at night, the quiet arguments, the way they talked around me when I walked into the room. It all clicked together now. The shuttle bus was waiting below, its doors open, passengers filing on. My parents and Audrey had already climbed in. Mom looked back and waved me over. "Dominic, come on." I didn't move. I couldn't. "I'm not going," I said, the words hard and sharp in my throat, even as my heart pounded. Mom froze. Dad turned back, his face flushed and furious. "Dominic, you dare?" he shouted. But I was already running. Back up the ramp. Back through the hall. Back to her. Grandma was still there. Thank God. I rushed to her, dropped to my knees in front of her chair, and grabbed her hands. "Grandma, it's me. I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice cracking. She looked down at me, her eyes clearer now. She smiled faintly, and for a second, her hand squeezed mine. "Billy," she whispered. I was so scared. I pulled her into a hug, and she trembled in my arms. We sat there as my family's plane took off, the roar of engines echoing through the glass. I didn't look away. I watched the jet lift into the sky, becoming smaller and smaller until it vanished. And I knew in that moment, everything had changed. There was no going back. I had chosen Grandma, no matter the cost. Afterward, I didn't know what to do. My hands shook as I helped Grandma into a seat in the quiet terminal. Her head leaned gently against my shoulder. She seemed calm, unaware of the enormity of what had just happened. Should I take her back to my parents' house? That place filled with tension and criticism, where Grandma was treated like an afterthought. I couldn't. I wouldn't. Then I remembered something Grandma had said, maybe a week ago, maybe longer, about her younger brother Walter. She'd spoken of him with rare clarity and warmth, like his name was a window into a part of her that still remembered love and safety. He lived in a place called Kearney, Nebraska. I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling slightly, and typed in Walter Harmon Farm, Kearney, Nebraska. A listing came up, Harmon's Farm, with a number. I swallowed hard and tapped call. A couple of rings, then a voice. Older, gravelly but alert. "Walter Harmon here. Who's this?" I hesitated. Mr. Harmon, my name's Dominic Callahan. I'm Esther's grandson." Silence. "I'm with her now, at the Lincoln Airport. My family, they just left. I didn't go with them. I chose to stay with her. She needs help." I didn't know who else to call. The silence stretched, and then he spoke. His voice broke just a little. "Bring her here," he said, firm but full of emotion. "I'll take you both in." I blinked hard. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." I found the earliest bus, long distance, from Lincoln to Kearney. It left that evening. I used my last bit of cash to buy 2 tickets. When the time came, I helped Grandma to the gate. She seemed to trust me completely, her fingers curled around mine like a child's. We boarded, and I settled us into 2 seats near the back. The bus was half empty. The air was dry and smelled faintly of gasoline and plastic. I offered her one of the sandwiches I had bought from the airport, dry turkey and lettuce. We ate in silence, bumping along the dark roads, headlights flashing through the windows like ghosts passing by. Grandma dozed off, her head resting on my shoulder, and eventually, I did too. When the bus stopped in Kernay just as dawn broke, my eyes opened groggily to the soft morning light. Outside the window, a tall, weathered man stood on the platform, holding a sign. Esther and Dominic. I gently nudged Grandma. We're here. She blinked slowly, smiled. I helped her up, and we stepped off the bus. The air was crisp and cool. The man looked like he belonged to the earth. Thin skin, thick hands, a faded checkered shirt, worn jeans. Walter? I asked. He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on Grandma. Esther, he whispered, stepping forward. She stared for a moment, then broke into a soft smile. Walter, when did you get so big? She said. He pulled her into a tight hug, his shoulders shaking. You had me so worried, he said, voice trembling. I stood still, watching them, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, warmth filled my chest. This was family, not perfection, not blood, but care. Real, living care. Walter turned to me. You must be Dominic. I nodded. Yes, sir. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Thank you for bringing her back. He drove us to the farm in an old pickup that rumbled like an old dog. The sun was rising over rows of corn and red soil. A small wooden house came into view, humble and beautiful in its simplicity. Mary, Walter's wife, opened the door before we even stepped out. She was short and rosy-cheeked, with flour on her apron. You must be Dominic, she said, handing me a warm cookie before I could even speak. And you must be Esther. She wrapped Grandma in a gentle hug. Come in. We've got tea ready. We sat around their kitchen table as I explained everything. The tension in Lincoln, how they ignored Grandma, how I made the decision at the airport. I spoke quickly, afraid I might lose courage if I paused. Walter listened quietly. Then he nodded, his eyes steady on mine. You did the right thing, he said, patting my shoulder. From now on, she stays with us. And you, too, if you want. I looked at Grandma, now sipping tea and smiling faintly at Mary. I nodded. Yes, I'd like that. A week passed on Walter's farm, and it felt like stepping into a dream I never knew I needed. The house was small, but filled with warmth. It sat nestled among cornfields, apple trees heavy with fruit bending in the breeze. Each morning, I woke in the attic room they gave me, small, cozy, with a slanted ceiling and a view of the eastern field. I could hear birdsong through the cracks in the window and smell Mary's butter cookies baking downstairs. Grandma spent her days on the porch, sitting in an old armchair with a quilt draped over her knees. She often held Grandpa's photo and looked out across the fields with misty eyes. Sometimes, she'd sing a soft folk tune I didn't recognize. Her voice was shaky, but full of something that made me stop whatever I was doing to listen. During the day, I helped Walter. We loaded baskets of apples and pumpkins onto his old truck and drove into Kearney's main street corner to set up our market stall. The people here were kind, calling Walter by name and asking about Grandma with genuine care. How's Esther doing? An elderly flower vendor asked, her eyes warm and crinkled at the corners. I smiled, a little surprised at how natural it felt. She's okay, I said, though she sometimes forgets names. Walter just patted my shoulder, reassuring me I didn't need to explain too much. That meant something. Back in Lincoln, everyone needed reasons, clarity, a label. Here, they just accepted her. People saw Grandma as she was, not as a burden. Evenings, we gathered around the dining table under the warm glow of an oil lamp. Mary would start in, sharing stories of Walter's youth, how he used to drive corn across Nebraska, a wild grin on his face, wind in his hair. You remember the time he got that old truck stuck in a dry creek bed and swore the axle was haunted? She said, laughing. Walter chuckled, shaking his head. Mary, it was a busted axle, not a ghost. And you said I drove into that creek bed on purpose, which is just plain slander. She waved him off. Oh, hush. You always did like making a mess out of simple things. Grandma sat quietly most nights, though every now and then she'd pipe in with something about Grandpa. Fragmented memories, out of order, but soft with meaning. George used to plant weed on that ridge over there, she said once, pointing out the window, her voice dreamy. Said the wind talked different there. I listened, not just heard them, but really listened. And for once, I felt a connection that didn't require me to perform, to act like the model son or the obedient grandson. This was different. It was real. No masks, no rehearsed lines. But peace didn't last long. My phone started buzzing. At first, just a vibration in my pocket. Then again, and again, and again. Mom, Dad, Audrey. The screen lit up with their names, one after the other. I glanced at it. Dozens of notifications. Missed calls. Texts. I didn't open them right away. I already knew. They'd come back from Africa. The first message from Mom said, Dominic, where are you? And Grandma, Why aren't you home? Call me now. But the messages that followed were different. Sharper. Harder. What do you think you're doing, Dominic? Do you know how worried we are? Bring her back now. Dad's tone was worse. Dominic, you dare run away like this? You've humiliated us. If you don't come back, don't blame me. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the phone. Audrey's messages were fewer, but somehow they hit the hardest. Mom and Dad are furious. Mom's been crying. Where are you? I'm worried about you and Grandma. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't reply. Each message was a stab, a reminder of Lincoln, of being the good son, of falling in line, of never asking why. But not this time. They'd left Grandma, alone, at the airport, like an extra suitcase they forgot to pick up, like she didn't matter. And that, I couldn't forget. I turned off the phone and stuffed it into my pocket. Then I went to help Mary with the dishes. You okay, Dominic? She asked gently, her kind eyes studying me. I nodded, forcing a smile. I'm fine, Mary. I just need time. That night, I sat on the porch with Grandma under Nebraska's star-filled sky. She held Grandpa's photo close, tracing his face with one trembling finger. George, she whispered, the boy's grown so fast, hasn't he? She meant me. I knew that. But in her mind, I was still Billy. Her memories blurred, shifting like wind over wheat. I didn't correct her. I just held her hand. Her fingers were so small and frail, paper-thin skin over bone. Let them blame me, I told myself. Let them be angry. But Grandma and I, we're never going back to that house. The field in front of me shimmered silver under the moonlight. And I felt it resolve, a kind of strength I'd never known. Walter came out, stepping quietly onto the porch and handed me a steaming mug of tea. He sat beside me with a quiet sigh. What are you thinking about? Sitting here all quiet, he asked, his voice low and warm. I took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Messages. My parents. They're furious. I feel bad for Audrey, but... Walter waited. I exhaled. I know they're upset. Part of me feels guilty. But they abandoned her, Walter. They left her alone. And I can't let that go. He nodded, then patted my shoulder. You did what most wouldn't, Dominic. Don't let them shake you. Esther needs you, and you need a place to call home. This is your home. I nodded, my eyes stinging. Thank you for taking us in, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. Walter smiled and pointed at the sky. Look at those stars, so bright. Don't let the bad stuff dim your light. The days that followed at Walter's farm passed in a simple rhythm, as if time here flowed more slowly, allowing me to breathe and rediscover myself. I woke early each morning to help Walter water the crops, weed the garden, and load crates of apples onto the truck for the market. Mary taught me how to make butter cookies, the kind Grandma used to bake when I was a child. Esther made these better than me, Mary said with a laugh, winking. But I caught a flicker of sadness in her eyes when she mentioned Grandma. Grandma spent most of her time on the porch, clutching Grandpa's framed photo, sometimes murmuring fragmented stories about days long gone. Sometimes she called me Billy. Other times, she got my name right, Dominic. And each time she did, it warmed my heart. Despite the peace here, I couldn't fully shake a lingering unease. My phone buzzed daily with increasingly harsh messages from my parents. Dominic, you can't just run away like this. What are you doing with Grandma? Bring her back now. That was from Mom, her tone a mix of anger and panic. Dad's words were colder. You think you can make decisions on your own? You're tearing this family apart. Audrey's messages were fewer, but they cut deeper. I miss you. Mom and Dad keep fighting. I don't know what to do. I read them, but I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say, when every word from them reminded me of that moment at the airport, when they left Grandma alone in a sea of strangers. One afternoon, while I was helping Walter fix a wooden fence, he called out to me. Dominic, come here a moment, he said, his voice low but serious. I wiped the sweat from my brow and followed him into the shed, which smelled of old wood and hay. He rummaged in a corner, moving aside some tools and boxes, then pulled out a rusty metal box. Opening it, he handed me a thick, yellowed envelope. This, he said, is from Esther. She asked me to keep it after George passed. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside were property deeds for the farm, a savings book with numbers that stunned me, and a life insurance policy in Grandma's name. I looked up at Walter, confused. Grandma gave this to you? I asked. He nodded, sitting down on a wooden crate, his eyes growing distant. She knew her memory wouldn't last. After George died, she gave it all to me, saying I'd know who to give it to when the time came. He looked at me, quiet for a moment. I think that time is now. I didn't know what to say. The envelope felt heavy, not just from the papers, but from their significance. Grandma, despite her fading memory, had planned for the future, for me, long ago. I thought of my parents, of their stiff faces and awkward questions when they first met her, how they prodded about her papers, asking what she'd done to secure her affairs. Their voices had that careful sharpness, the kind used on fragile things they didn't quite value. And then, when they realized she couldn't remember, their attitudes shifted. She was no longer the strong woman who once raised 3 kids and ran a household. Just a burden, something inconvenient. But even in her haze, she still thought of others. "Walter, you keep it," I said, pushing the envelope back across the table. "I don't need it." Walter shook his head, his mouth tugging into a faint smile. "Dominic, your grandma wanted you to have it," he said. "Not for the money. Because she trusts you." That night, I couldn't sleep. The envelope sat untouched on my bedside table. I stared at it for hours, but never reached for it again. My thoughts kept drifting back to Grandma, to her smile when she remembered my name, to her voice calling for me in the middle of the night, unsure where she was. I made myself a promise. I'd care for her. Not because of those papers. Not because of the money. But because she was family, the only one who still felt like home. A few days later, something shifted. Grandma was unusually lucid that morning. Her voice, usually soft and wandering, rang out clearly down the hallway. "Dominic," she called. "Come sit with me." I stepped into her room. The light was filtering in through the window, casting soft shadows on the floor. She was sitting up in bed, frail but upright, her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. She pointed to the old wicker chair by her bed. "Sit with me." I did, and she took my hand. Her fingers were paper-thin, the skin warm but stretched tight over bone. Still, her grip was steady. "I don't remember everything," she said. Her eyes met mine. "But I know you're a good person. You didn't abandon me." I smiled, swallowing hard, blinking fast. "I'll never abandon you," I said, my voice barely holding. She nodded slowly. "Call someone for me. Lawyer Thompson in town. Now." She nodded again. "I want to see him." I didn't ask questions. I called. Mr. Thompson came that afternoon, carrying his leather briefcase. He looked exactly as I remembered. White hair, round glasses, a man of precision and soft footsteps. We all gathered in Walter's living room. The oil lamp glowed golden, casting warmth over the wooden walls and worn rug. Grandma sat in her rocker, her back straight, her voice clearer than I'd heard in weeks. "I want to transfer all my assets," she said. "The farm, the savings, insurance, all of it." Mr. Thompson looked up from his pad. "To whom, ma'am?" She pointed at me. "He takes care of me," she said. "I want him to have it all." I froze. My hands went cold. "Grandma." Walter's hand came down on my shoulder. A quiet gesture. He shook his head gently. "Let her speak." Thompson scribbled notes, nodding occasionally. "I'll have everything ready in a few days." As he left, Grandma reached for my hand again. Her grip was weaker now, but her voice held firm. "I don't have much time left, Dominic. But I'm at peace because of you." I knelt beside her, hugging her carefully, my tears falling silently onto her shoulder. That moment, it wasn't about the farm or savings. It was love, trust, a quiet passing of something far more valuable. The following weeks became a rhythm. I balanced everything, my work, my classes. I enrolled part-time at a community college in Kernay, picking up courses in agriculture and business management. I helped Walter at the market during the day, learning the feel of produce in my hands, the weight of money in the till, the numbers in the ledger. At night, I came home to her. I changed her diapers when she couldn't manage. I read to her from the old books she once read to me as a child. One evening, I sat beside her bed reading The Wind in the Willows. She smiled, her eyes half-lidded. "George loved this one." I paused, startled. "Grandpa?" She nodded faintly. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Yes." And that's when I realized, even as her memory faded, fragments of Grandpa remained. Like precious gems buried deep, still shining. She started recalling small things. One afternoon, she taught me how to make butter cookies, though her trembling hands spilled flour across the table like drifting snow. "Roll the dough thin, Dominic," she said, her voice steady despite the shake in her fingers, her tone serious, like the teacher she once was. I laughed, not to mock her, but because there was something so precious in the way she tried to teach, firm, proud, and full of love. "I'm trying, Grandma," I said, concentrating as I flattened the dough under the rolling pin, though I could already tell it wasn't even. She watched closely, nodding. "Not too thin. You want them crisp, not brittle." I slid the cookies onto the tray and into the oven, and we both sat at the table, her hands folded loosely in her lap. When the timer dinged, I pulled the tray out. The edges were darker than they should have been. I frowned. A little burnt. She took one and bit into it slowly. Then she closed her eyes and gave a small sigh. Just like mine. I looked at her. "You're just being nice." She opened her eyes and smiled. "No, Dominic. I mean it. They taste like home." That moment, her smile, the smell of butter and flour in the air, became a treasure I'd hold on to for years. Then one day, Not long after, she asked me to take a photo of her holding my college acceptance letter. Her voice was weak, yet clear. "Keep this one," she said, gripping the envelope with trembling hands. "So you'll remember I'm proud of you." I called out to Mary, who was working in the kitchen. "Mary, can you take a photo of us?" Mary smiled and came over. I stood next to Grandma, her hand still wrapped around the letter, and smiled while she looked up at me, her eyes bright, brighter than they'd been in weeks, as if trying to etch the moment into her memory before it slipped away. But Grandma's health was fading. She slept more, spoke less. Her lucid moments became rare, like breaks in a heavy fog. I knew what it meant, but I didn't want to dwell on it. I just wanted to be there, with her, for her, and hold on to the fragments of memory she had left. 2 years passed like seasons turning. I stayed close, studying agriculture at the community college, helping Walter at the market, and caring for Grandma. Every morning, I'd check on her, see if she'd slept, if she needed her diaper changed, her pills arranged. The rhythm of her care became my life. She rarely spoke now. Most days, she sat quietly in her wheelchair, her gaze fixed on the cornfields outside the window. Sometimes I'd catch her eyes moving, slowly scanning the horizon, as though she were listening for Grandpa's voice in the wind rustling through the stalks. One spring afternoon, I wheeled her outside. The sun was soft on our faces, the breeze warm. I sat beside her, and she reached for my hand. She didn't say a word, but she squeezed gently, and that was enough. That squeeze told me she knew. She remembered. She felt my presence. Those small moments, they gave me strength when I had none left. My parents kept messaging. Their words no longer mattered. Their blame, their threats, they were like dry leaves blowing past. Audrey still texted now and then. Short messages. "Are you okay? How's Grandma?" I replied. Briefly. I knew she was caught in the middle, still their daughter, still my sister. Then graduation day came. I never imagined I'd make it this far. Not when I'd left Lincoln, not with everything that happened. I stood in front of the attic mirror, adjusting the cap, brushing imaginary lint from the gown. I should have felt proud. I did. But the hollowness was there too, quiet and present. Grandma wouldn't be here much longer. Still, I wanted her to see it. I wheeled her onto the campus lawn, where the ceremony was held under the bright Nebraska sun. She wore her familiar dark green sweater, the one she always wore when she wanted to look her best. Her cloudy eyes lifted, and a faint smile pulled at her lips when she saw me. "Dominic," she whispered. I knelt beside her, holding her thin hand in mine. "Grandma," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I did it." She nodded slowly. Her smile widened. For a second, her eyes cleared, and it felt like she truly saw me. I turned to a student nearby. "Would you mind taking a photo of us?" The girl nodded, and I stood behind the wheelchair, placing my hands gently on Grandma's shoulders. I smiled for the camera. Grandma looked straight ahead, her eyes, for one brief second, bright again, as if trying to hold on to the moment. I kept that photo in my wallet, a reminder that she was with me, even in her silence. It was the one from graduation day, me in the cap and gown, Grandma in her shawl, smiling gently, her hand wrapped around mine. She hadn't said much that day, just sat quietly, her eyes soft and full, as if taking everything in and letting it settle inside her. I looked at the photo often, especially in quiet moments. I looked at it now. The ceremony had passed quickly. Applause, laughter, caps tossed into the air like birds released. I heard my name called, walked across the stage, shook hands. But my eyes searched for one face in the crowd. Grandma was there in her wheelchair, Walter beside her, clapping gently. Mary had a tissue in her hand, already dabbing at her eyes. Afterward, they hugged me tight. Walter's arms were firm, steady. "Grandpa would have been proud," he said. "And Grandma too," Mary added, squeezing my arm. But as I looked at Grandma, small, fragile, already beginning to lean into Walter's shoulder, I just wanted to take her home to rest. She looked tired, not from the day, but from life. I remember brushing a bit of confetti off her shawl, and she looked up at me, eyes shimmering with something I couldn't quite name. A week later, Grandma passed away. It was a quiet morning, sunlight filtering through the window and landing gently across her face. I had made coffee, brought it in with the newspaper folded under my arm like always. When I called out to her, and she didn't stir, I moved closer. "Grandma." No answer. I reached out and touched her hand. It was cool, too still. I stared at her face, her eyes closed, her expression soft, peaceful. She'd gone quietly in her sleep, as if she'd simply drifted away and found Grandpa waiting on the other side. I sat down on the edge of the bed and held her hand, even though she was no longer there. I didn't cry with loud sobs, just silent tears that slipped down and pooled along my jaw and collar. A river of grief and something deeper, gratitude. I kept my promise. She'd never been alone. The framed photo of Grandpa was still on the nightstand, tilted slightly. But her fingers clutched it, even in her final moment. That undid me all over again. I called Walter and Mary. When they arrived, they came in quietly, like they already knew. Mary's voice broke. She went peacefully. Walter didn't say anything. He just placed a hand on my shoulder, and I leaned into it, needing the grounding. We held Grandma's funeral at the farm. It was a simple ceremony, just Walter, Mary, a few kind neighbors from Cerny, and me. I didn't invite my parents, not out of anger, but because this part of her story, this end, didn't belong to them. A bouquet arrived the day before. White daisies. A note tucked inside. Dominic, I'm sorry. I hope Grandma rests in peace. Audrey. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. But I placed the daisies on her grave anyway. We laid her to rest under the old oak tree, the one she used to sit beneath and watch the field sway. I stood by her grave and remembered the things she'd taught me, not through lectures or advice, but by simply living, loving, holding on even when her memory faded. I made a vow, there by the oak tree, to live a life that honored her, to be worthy of the trust she'd placed in me. In the days that followed, I felt like I was standing between two worlds. One was here, Cerny, Walter and Mary, the farm, the quiet kind of peace Grandma had shown me. The other was Lincoln, my parents, Audrey, my childhood, with all its weight and silence. But I knew I had to go back, not to reconcile, but to face them, to look my parents in the eye and understand what they felt when they learned Grandma was gone and that I'd chosen her over them. I packed light, a few clothes. I double-checked my wallet, making sure the photo from graduation day was still there. It was. At the bus station, Walter stood with me as the bus pulled in, his hands in his jacket pockets. He didn't say much, but his eyes, kind and steady, were tinged with worry. You don't have to do this, Dominic, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. But if you've made up your mind, stay strong like you always have. And remember, Kearney is always your home. I nodded, pulled him into a quick hug, and boarded the bus, feeling like I was stepping into a storm I wasn't sure I could weather. The 3-hour ride from Kearney to Lincoln felt like a lifetime. I kept my forehead pressed to the glass, watching the cornfields stretch endlessly, the dusty roads winding through them like veins. Every passing barn and fence line sparked something. Grandma humming on the porch with her iced tea, her warm hand gripping mine, calling me Billy with a smile full of memory and confusion. It wasn't until the bus slowed at my stop that the weight truly hit. The old house on 18th Street hadn't changed much. White two-story with a wooden fence, the lawn trimmed just enough to not look abandoned. But it felt different, smaller, not just in size, but in spirit. When I stepped through the door, I saw them. My parents sat in the living room like ghosts. Dad, Graham Callahan, once so imposing, looked shrunken in the armchair. His broad shoulders hunched forward, hair streaked heavily with gray. He stared down, like something in the carpet was more important than my presence. Mom, Catherine, was on the couch. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red and swollen. Her clothes looked slept in. She'd always been so particular about her image, her presence. Today, she looked like someone else entirely. Audrey wasn't home, away at college. They both looked at me, but didn't say a word. The silence filled the room, thick and brittle. Finally, Mom rose halfway from the couch. Her arms twitched as if to hug me, but then fell limp at her sides. Dominic, she said, voice shaky. Where have you been? Where's Grandma? I looked at her. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad, either. I was just tired. Grandma passed away 2 weeks ago, I said. My voice came out flat, like I was reciting a date in history class. She died in Kearney, where she was loved. Mom crumpled back into the chair, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders began to shake. I didn't want this, she mumbled, her voice strangled. I thought it was for the best. Dad didn't move. He didn't look at me. His hands gripped the arms of the chair like they were the only thing keeping him upright. I waited. I gave him a chance to say something, to explain, to apologize, anything. But he just stared at the floor. So I told them everything. About the bus ride. About Walter's farm. About her final days. I told them how she made it to my graduation, how she smiled as I walked across the stage, how she held my hand that night and told me I was a good person. I didn't accuse them. I didn't shout. I just told them the truth. Word by word, slow and careful, like peeling off old wallpaper. Each sentence was a blade. Not to wound them, but to make them see. To make it undeniable. When I finished, Mom was crying. Not little sobs, broken. Her mouth moved like she was trying to speak, but the only thing I caught was, I'm sorry, over and over. I didn't think it would come to this, she said through tears. Enough, Catherine, Dad said. His voice was rough. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were wet. You did what I couldn't, he said, voice trembling. I was wrong. That was all he said. But it was enough for me to know he understood, even if only partially, the cost of his choices. I saw it in his eyes, regret, maybe even sorrow. But I didn't stay long. I didn't want to hear more apologies or excuses. I wasn't looking for redemption from them. I just wanted them to know the simple truth, that Grandma passed in peace, that she wasn't alone, and that I'd chosen my path. As I turned to leave, Mom reached out and gently grabbed my hand. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Dominic, you can come back anytime. This is still your home." I gave a faint smile. I didn't say anything. What could I have said? This wasn't home anymore. My home was in Kernay, among the cornfields, with Walter and Mary and the memories of Grandma. Back in Kernay, I began building a new life. I used part of Grandma's inheritance to pay for college tuition and the rest as capital to open a small coffee shop near the community college. I named it Memory Lane, a way to keep Grandma close in my everyday life. The shop wasn't big, just a few wooden tables, a small counter, and walls decorated with old photos. Grandma standing in front of the farm, us together on my graduation day, Walter grinning beside his apple-laden truck. Each time I looked at those photos, I felt her presence, warm and comforting, like she was still smiling at me from just across the room. The coffee shop quickly became a favorite for students and locals. They loved the smell of roasted coffee, the butter cookies I learned to make from Mary, and they listened when I talked about Grandma. I only shared the happy parts, how she taught me to bake, the folk songs she'd hum while folding laundry. I never mentioned the airport or the days in Lincoln. That story was mine alone, and I wasn't ready to share it. Every weekend, I visited the local nursing home. I brought along old books Grandma used to read. I'd sit with the elderly, reading aloud to them, sharing stories about her, about Grandpa, about summer days at the farm. They listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes reaching out to hold my hand, as if they could feel the love wrapped in every word. One afternoon, as I finished reading a chapter from and of Green Gables, an elderly woman looked at me and said softly, "You're like my mother, always caring for others." I smiled, though my heart ached quietly. I didn't know if I was like Grandma, not really, but I knew I wanted to be. I wanted to live in a way that honored her. Then, one day, Audrey called. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Dominic." "I'm sorry," she said. I sat on the back steps of the shop, the phone pressed close. "I wasn't brave like you," she continued. "I was scared. Scared of upsetting Mom and Dad, scared of doing the wrong thing." I listened. I didn't feel anger, just a quiet ache and, more than anything, pity. Audrey was still young, still trapped in that invisible cage our parents had built around us. "It's okay, Audrey," I said gently. "You'll find your own way. Take your time." She cried then. I didn't stop her. I just stayed on the line, quiet, present. We promised we'd meet, but not in Lincoln. In Kernay, when she was ready. My story ends here. But it's not a sad ending. I learned that family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand by you when the world turns its back. Grandma taught me that, not through words, but through how she lived, how she loved me, even as her memory faded. I opened Memory Lane not just to make a living, but to keep those memories alive. Every time I read to an elderly person, every time I look out at the cornfields, I know Grandma is still there, in my heart, guiding me. If you ask me if I have regrets, I'll say no. I chose her, and she chose me. That's the most precious gift I have, and I'll carry it with me forever. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.